Hello.
Hello. How's it going?
It's been good. How have you been?
Not bad, just a little bit tired.
Hmm.
Is this your first time in Cape Town
It is, yeah.
and also South Africa?
Yeah.
Oh, this should be fun. That makes two of us.
Hmm.
So I wanted to kind of take sort of the next few minutes and cover a handful of things everywhere from how Ethereum started to kind of where we are now, and then kind of just take some of your thoughts on what we can and cannot do with this technology. But to kind of go take a step back, I'd like to kind of just learn a bit more about sort of starting with Bitcoin. How did you get into this ecosystem? How did you get to start Ethereum, and the inspiration around the project?
Sure. So I first found out about Bitcoin back in early 2011, and the way that I got into this space was I found people who were willing to pay me in Bitcoin for writing articles about Bitcoin. And first there was this blog called Bitcoin Weekly, and then soon after that, this guy from Romania called Mihai Alicia reached out to me saying he was founding a Bitcoin magazine, and I became the head writer of that, and then did that for a couple of years while going through school, starting university. Then about 2 years after that, I kind of went full-time into the space, and I started looking more heavily at a lot of different Bitcoin projects, and back then Bitcoin projects was basically all that there was. Started looking into colored coins, some of the kind of more powerful protocols at the time, things like Mastercoin, and eventually I realized that there was an opportunity to make something much more general purpose than what already existed. And so that was where my kind of very earliest proposal for Ethereum came from. Like basically take kind of existing protocols that existed at the time, like Mastercoin, that basically said, here are 15 different things that you can do, here's 15 different types of transactions for them, and instead say, well, you just have a programming language with one type of transaction, and inside of that programming language, you can kind of express the logic to just do whatever you want.
So when you were thinking about extending those existing projects or adding a bit more of abstraction, was that based out of a need, or sort of just because you thought it was cool and we should do that?
And it definitely just seemed like obviously the correct way to go. And at the time, the number of applications that actually like had users aside from Bitcoin itself was like basically zero.
For sure. And kind of given how the project started with the goals you wanted to sort of accomplish, how would you compare that now with where Ethereum is and sort of the direction or even the use cases people have kind of adopted or converged to?
So interestingly enough, we've kind of come full circle in a way. So the kind of very early versions of Ethereum that were almost kind of proto-Ethereum, so even before Ethereum, the name, came along, it was trying to generalize Mastercoin's financial derivatives feature. And so then after that, then a set of applications expanded and people started talking about non-financial applications, like using blockchains to manage decentralized storage systems, to manage, to do things like ENS, like domain name systems, like identity management, and then all of this enterprise stuff started happening. And of course, in the last couple of months, people have just been really excited about decentralized finance. So I thought that was kind of fun.
So it's a lot of topics that you kind of foreshadowed on what we're going to talk about. As a quick reminder to the audience, we're actually going to be taking questions with the hashtag ETHCapeTown on Twitter. So if you have any questions you want to ask Vitalik, kind of tweet that question with that hashtag, and we'll kind of filter them to me, and we'll ask them on stage after the chat. I guess like given that, that's sort of definitely where the full circle of Ethereum itself kind of came to be. How has your particular role changed over the past 4 years?
And it's definitely changed a lot, especially just because of how the scale of the project increased. Like 5 years ago, it was basically myself and a couple of other people that were just figuring out everything and like figuring out the protocol, implementing the protocol, kind of bootstrapping the community, setting up the Ether sale back in 2014, like talking to security auditors. There was this kind of fairly small team that just did everything, and over time the number of people in the ecosystem kind of went up and up more, and we've had kind of more layers of abstraction added on, so it grew from being one team to this big Ethereum foundation that contained multiple teams. And then now, well, last year we've launched a grant program, and now probably the majority of the things the foundation funds is outside of the kind of quote foundation as an organization. So I feel like many of the things I focus on have kind of become a bit more high level. Though, I mean, there was kind of always some of that. So like back in 2014, I wrote kind of a blog post about like Shelling Coin, which was this idea for a decentralized oracle, and like Augur ended up, I think, taking a lot of ideas from that. We were talking about a lot of these kind of different DAO concepts. And then maybe a bit after that, I focused more on just getting proof of stake and sharding figured out. And right now, I basically think that like most of the almost all of the research problems are around, well, definitely around all around proof of stake, and most around sharding have basically been solved. And so now it's at the point where it's like the spec for at least the first phase of Ethereum 2.0 is kind of entering really finalization stages, and then the phase 1 is further behind, but still like nothing fundamentally unsolved. And then phase 2 is the thing that we're currently focusing on trying to start piecing together. So I've been heavily involved in some of that, but then I also spend my time thinking about kind of more high-level things around like DAO design, like economics, governance, and all these other topics.
That's awesome, and we're going to dig a bit deeper into 2.0 soon. Kind of going back to the way you think about Ethereum as a platform, what are some of the applications that you think are sort of useful to you, or just in general you would like to see? And kind of where do you see as there's an opportunity for us to introduce anywhere from a smart contract platform to a blockchain?
Yeah, and in the short term, I think like the decentralized finance stuff that's been happening definitely is providing things that are useful and curly, and providing things that have value to people. And I feel like we've always had this idea in the space that finance is going to come first. And the usual kind of reason why I think that's the case is just because if you compare to existing technology, kind of other outside of blockchain, finance just is the sector that's the most terrible. Like in many countries, like even really developed ones like the United States, like you'd be surprised just how insanely inefficient it is to move money between accounts. And once you start talking about international payments, then it gets even worse. But anywhere outside of payments, like people are already kind of used to, just being able to spin up whatever you want in one click. And so the bar that anything decentralized blockchain has to compete with just purely usability-wise is higher. But I think like now that the technology is starting to get better, like it's definitely at the point where things outside of these kind of narrowly financial applications can really start taking off.
So when you say decentralized finance, are you kind of in your mind referring to some specific kind of financial instruments or subsets of what that includes, or is it just the movement in general where you can have a better efficient system doing the same things we have right now?
It's definitely a broad category. So like, for example, most people would say Maker counts as decentralized finance, Augur counts, Uniswap counts. But then these tends to be fairly kind of pure applications, like stuff just happens inside of the crypto space and people use it, and there's not too much connection to kind of things outside of the blockchain, except for maybe kind of the price feeds, because you do have to like connect up to what the actual value is of like $1 or whatever. But then there's projects that are starting to kind of poke out more and make things that are financial but also kind of more closely connected to real world things. So for example, there's been a couple of projects trying to do smart contract based insurance. And these tends to be the parametric insurance applications. So they say, you put money into a smart contract, and if, say, a flood happens, or there's not enough water, or the temperature is like above some value, then you automatically get a payout. And I know there's a project called Hurricane Guard that's been trying to do this for natural disasters. There's something in Sri Lanka trying to do it for crop insurance. So that kind of area seems like something that more and more things are happening in.
And I guess like maybe a bit briefly, what are some of the, I guess, barriers to entry right now in terms of implementing these types of solutions compared to like kind of offering the same in the traditional finance? So right now, a lot of the models we see in DeFi are sort of collateral based. Do you think there's a way to sort of evolve past that?
Evolving past collateral based, not sure, because
Rather over collateral.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely improve collateral efficiency, but then you could argue that the collateral kind of based design of the whole thing is an advantage in some ways. But like in terms of improving kind of collateral efficiency, right? One of the interesting things that we can think about is that, like, I know this kind of model exists in Africa and it exists in other places too. There's these kind of rotating kind of clubs where people just kind of coordinates to kind of put money into a pool, and the designs differ, but basically it's to kind of help people save, but potentially you could also turn it into an insurance sort of kind of application. And so if you try to kind of take these social models where you say you have kind of groups of people that are participating together, then often enough they can reduce the amount of capital that you need because you can sort of share more.
And I guess in this case, like, where do you think identity and reputation kicks in, or is that even directly related?
Yeah, identity and reputation is definitely something that's very important. I think, so first of all, well, it depends what you mean by identity and reputation, because the word just means like
broad.
5 different things. Like, one meaning of identity is just being able to prove that you who's trying to spend the money is the same, and like whatever it is that received the money. And this is just user account security, but it's basically an identity problem. And there the challenge is that like the default approach to doing this is that you just have one key, but then if your key gets lost or if your key gets stolen, then you're basically screwed. And trying to move beyond that and one of the things I'm a fan of is this kind of social recovery approach that says, you have 5 friends and they each get a share of your key, and it's kind of mathematically set up in such a way that any 3 of your 5 friends can recover your key if you lose it. You could do a similar thing for key revocations. So things like that are something that I'm interested in. And the nice thing there is also that if we can create a kind of robust kind of identity management solution like just for doing things like that, then you can actually kind of migrate it beyond just on-blockchain things and even just to use it as an identity system for off-blockchain applications. So that's one kind of identity, just this kind of purely sort of self-attested. A second kind of identity is these kind of anti-Sybil metrics. So this is coming up with some kind of token where it's easy to get one, but it's like extremely difficult to get many. And this is useful for like voting schemes. It's useful for a lot of applications. But this is the sort of thing that, and you could definitely use blockchains as an ingredient, but there's also this big design problem of how to actually make these systems. And then the third kind of identity basically is reputation, which is that like it's not just about proving you are something, and it's not just about proving you are a unique human. It's about proving that you have certain properties, right? And this could be kind of other people attesting to your trustworthiness. It could be other people or even organizations saying, we've verified something about this person. Governments saying we verified something about this person. But like, then we start kind of talking about this idea that you have this ecosystem of the ability of identities to make claims about each other, and that's something that you can definitely leverage for like reputation and credit and all of these other things.
I hope everybody's taking notes. There's like 4 ideas for how to do identity hack here this weekend. I guess one other thing, sort of what we've seen in terms of historically, a lot of new and breakthrough technologies let you sort of leapfrog some of the existing infrastructures. In terms of kind of seeing where Ethereum or blockchain in general plays a role in certain geographies, how do you kind of think about use cases for those types of things? Anywhere from like maybe different ways of voting or finding out misappropriation of funds to like other unique use cases that may not be possible. Do you have any thoughts on sort of the topic here?
Yeah, and there's definitely an opportunity for blockchain-based projects to just take a lead in areas where existing in infrastructure is either in a very far behind or just it doesn't really exist at all, right? Like there's definitely parts of the world where you can just say, well, oh, you know, like, what's the point of this when you have your centralized like CFI apps that you can just use to send money to other people in a couple of seconds, but that's not something. And even just going beyond money, like even just things like insurance, things like even just giving people the ability to invest in things, and all of these kind of other bigger services that are part of finance that go beyond just like sending money to people. Also outside of finance, like even identity and reputation too. Like I think these kind of socially driven models of identity could even potentially leapfrog more centralized models of identity in places where the kind of centralized models of identity haven't really been fully established yet. So I think that's something interesting, because it makes sense, right? Because like the information about who is kind of trustworthy and who's willing to vouch for whom is something that kind of is pretty decentralized thing. And
more social than
yeah. I mean, the concept that it's something that kind of gets centralized into these kind of formalized institutions and numbers is itself pretty new. So that's also something that I think is worth looking at.
No, it's awesome. So I guess finance is not the only use case that we see for Ethereum or blockchains in general. There's a lot of people at this hackathon that want to build stuff and are looking for ideas. What are some of the things that'd be cool for you to see people hack on? Anywhere from things on your wish list to kind of cool improvements or additions that you would like to see?
I guess, and I think I've already said a lot of the things that I kind of care about, especially, and I especially want to try to kind of see things that either move beyond finance into these other areas or kind of combine elements of finance with elements of these other areas. The other category of things I haven't mentioned is probably kind of supply chain related stuff, but I mean, that's just an area that I personally am kind of less familiar with, like exactly what people have done so far and like what the benefits are. But it's definitely something that's worth exploring. In general, I'd say just innovative approaches to just solving these problems and in terms of just like people's ability to kind of connect with each other. And trust each other and all these things.
In a verifiable way.
Yeah. Another thing I care about also is trying to, like, this is like technically harder to the next level, but doing all of those things while preserving privacy. And like, I mean, zero-knowledge proof technology has just advanced forward leaps and bounds over the last year, and it's something that there's basically tools for it to start working with. So it's definitely something that's worth starting to explore. And like, you definitely want to take privacy seriously in these applications, right? Like, you don't want the fact that, oh, Bob trusted Charlie 60 points, but then Bob decided to decrease his rating to trusting Charlie 30 points. Like, you don't necessarily want that to be on a global public ledger. So that's like, for a lot of these applications, I think there's ways to kind of do zero-knowledge stuff to get the benefits, but without without kind of uncovering everything. So one example of this that I liked is like in cases where all you want is, like, basically one of the things I dislike about kind of the way the path that kind of many parts of the internet are taking is this trend toward just using centralized identity as a crutch for everything. And basically because it's like, where often enough the problem you're trying to solve is much smaller, right? So for example, if the problem you're trying to solve is just making it difficult for people to create 10,000 fake accounts, then like sure you could solve that by just capturing everyone's identity, but then you broke privacy. But there are ways to do it where you still preserve privacy, right? So like for example, if you have some existing identity system, then on top of that you can put a Zcash-like kind of anonymizing and mixing gadget, and then basically you just use zero-knowledge proofs to prove that you are one of these approved identities that's been checked by some system without revealing which one. And then you also reveal a magic number so that you can't kind of reuse that identity again without actually revealing which one it is that you've consumed. So things like that I'm also pretty interested in. Also, when we talk about account security solutions, a big part of this is just usability. Like you want these things to be just like, and accounts, like, this is account security is just a hugely important problem, right? Because like if you actually want people to be using, like decentralized anything, then they're interacting with it, they're going to be interacting with it through some kind of identity, and either that identity is broken, or that identity is secure because it's controlled by some centralized mechanism, but then you're kind of losing a lot of the benefit, or it's secure because of some decentralized mechanism, but then that's the thing that we have to build, right? So like, if you want to actually use any of these decentralized financial solutions and expect people other than kind of existing tech geeks to be able to use them and benefit from them, then you need some kind of account security solution that works for people, right? And that works for people that just haven't had that much exposure to computers yet. And then that's a hard challenge.
Absolutely, and it also sort of ties in with the scalability of the underlying platform too. And you kind of touched on E 2.0, but could you sort of describe sort of the goals of what the 2.0 clients are and kind of the phases, and just give us an update on the progress?
Sure. So, and for those who haven't heard this before, I mean, the Ethereum 2.0, like first of all, it's the two kind of major flagship components of it. One is Casper, which is our proof-of-stake algorithm, which replaces mining proof-of-work consensus with something that at least we consider to be much more efficient. And the second part is sharding, which is a kind of massive scalability improvement that happens because you don't need every computer in the network to process like every transaction in the network anymore. So it's split up into 3 phases, where phase 0 basically does proof of stake. Phase 1 does sharding, but just sharding for kind of verification of data availability. And phase 2 does kind of full sharding, including verifying transaction execution, smart contracts, and all these other things. So at the end of phase 2, it's a complete system, but then for phase 0 and phase 1, it's still kind of useful for some things. So currently, the phase 0 spec is like very close to completion. The phase 1 spec is kind of further behind, but the fundamental components are just all in place, and it's just an editing job. Phase 2 is still a bit further away, but it's rapidly working on that. In terms of client implementations, right, so there's these multiple teams that are mostly even not part of the Ethereum Foundation itself, though many of them are supported by grants, that are building clients, so basically like nodes that would run as part of the Ethereum 2.0 network. And that's like so far the ones that are furthest ahead, so that would probably be Lighthouse, Nimbus, maybe Prismatic. They've been, and I know Nimbus was the first to publish a testnet. I know Lighthouse is going to publish a testnet fairly soon. So it's definitely getting to that stage.
Would you sort of mind just telling us sort of what the performance improvements end up being with these implementations, and kind of what is the change we're seeing?
Sure. So with sharding, the goal is to get about 1,000 factor increase in scalability. Basically, just the way you do this is through not requiring every computer to process every transaction, right? Every computer only processes a small portion of transactions, and that removes the kind of biggest scalability bottleneck in the whole design.
1000x. That's awesome. One of the things we've done in some of our previous chats is a section called underrated or overrated. And the way that section works is that I'm going to say a topic, and you get to comment on if this is underrated or if it's overrated, and sort of why. So I'll kind of list a handful of topics, and maybe we can get some more from the audience on Twitter. But I'll kind of start off with DeFi, underrated or overrated.
Definitely slightly getting overrated at this point. But I mean, the parts that are underrated, I think, is like the part that basically tries to kind of push this stuff from theory into practice and tries to see, like, what does it actually mean to get, like, if this stuff provides value to like people even just outside of the crypto space, how do we actually realize that value? And that's something that I think it would be good to get more attention on.
Specifically, stablecoins, underrated or overrated?
Probably, and I'd say people talk about them enough at this point.
So is that underrated or overrated?
Honestly, it's also slightly overrated at this point.
We'll move on to the next.
Yeah.
Bitcoin forks.
Bitcoin forks. I mean, I think BSV is like still overrated for as long as the market cap has multiple digits. I mean, Bitcoin Cash, I think, even actually underrated at this point, and basically just because they've like, I mean, if you actually follow the community, they've just become considerably more sane ever since they've expunged the Bitcoin SV people, and like they're getting Schnorr signatures ahead of Bitcoin. Like that's
actually
cool.
impressive.
Like, yeah, like they've got like real technical talent in there. It's it's getting interesting.
What about forks in general?
Forks in general, I'd say underrated. Like I think. At this point, especially if you want to launch a new decentralized chain, then like forking an existing one is like I think even better than doing an ICO or like an I whatever O. Basically, just because it's and you just get a much better coin distribution that way. You also can tap into an existing community. More people like you and fewer people hate you. And
Occasionally.
Yeah, I mean, it does have a lot of benefits to it, and like even if you like do a fork and add a pre-mine, like it's just like that space I think has actually been underexplored relative to just other ways of launching projects that do have tokens in them.
Oh, that makes sense. What about blockchain governance?
Depends which circle you're talking in. I think if the circle is crypto, then definitely overrated. If the circle is Ethereum, actually, honestly, overrated as well. Like, basically because I think, like, especially in the short term, well, if we're talking about governance of Ethereum, then most of the things that Ethereum needs to just survive and prosper the next couple of years are not really contentious governance issues. Like, we know we need ETH 1.x, we know we need layer 2, we know we need ETH 2.0 and Casper and sharding. And it's, yeah, like I'm not convinced that kind of tweaks to governance itself can really improve things by that much in that regard. I mean, what can improve things is definitely tweaks to things like ecosystem funding, for example.
That was actually my next topic, ecosystem funding, underrated or overrated?
Definitely still slightly underrated at this point. I mean, I'm actually really happy that the Ethereum community is starting to kind of start tackling these issues of funding public goods in the ecosystem seriously and trying to experiment with different approaches that go beyond the Ethereum Foundation. Like, I think it's definitely healthy that the foundation is not the only source of funding, because just with every organization has weaknesses, every institution has blind spots, and so the more that we have to cover for each other's blind spots, I think the better a chance the Ethereum ecosystem has.
Absolutely, and kind of similar to what we've just kind of talked about, the approach that ETH 2.0 clients are taking to build this thing independently of the foundation. Do you have any comments on that? Is that underrated, overrated, unexplored? How do you see that?
It depends which aspect. So I think in general, the model has been very successful. Like and the original goals of this, right, were basically to say that we're going to push the job of developing these ETH 2.0 clients outside of the foundation, and the foundation is going to develop one client, which is the Python client, as a reference implementation, but it's deliberately written in a slow language, and so it's
what's the rationale for kind of offloading that to?
Yeah, I mean, we basically just want to prevent the foundation from becoming too big a point of centralization, because in ETH 1.0 we've just noticed it's become this kind of Geth and parity duopoly, and it would be nice to, I mean, the fact that it's a duopoly and not a monopoly is something that actually saved us during the denial of service attacks a couple of years ago, but it would be healthier to have even more clients. So we want to have that kind of balance of power in the community, and also just kind of ensure against the risk that the Ethereum Foundation will just have internal governance issues and not be able to get its acts together. So it's one of these kind of strategies of, let's support different approaches and hope, and these approaches are going to work pretty differently, and even if one of them succeeds, then the things can get off the ground. Now, of course, and I think the Ethereum Foundation has been done quite well over the last year and a half in many ways, and there's definitely many ways that it's improving still, but I think the grant program has been one of the biggest successes. The thing that I think is that I think it's doing the ETH 2.0 client ecosystem is doing a bit incorrectly is that I think it's gotten, the level of decentralization has gotten to the point where it's duplicating things too much. Like, we're talking about, like, how many implementations was it? Nimbus, Prismatic, Lighthouse, Shasper, Pegasus, Trinity, Harmony, Geth, the chain safe, Dean Eigenman's thing, I forget the name, like 10.
ETH.
And yes, ETH. So basically, like, these 10, like, going from 1 to 4 and 5 is good, but then these last 5, like, first of all, they're clear. There's no way that we're going to have enough resources to push all 10 to the best level of quality. And so I think the thing that these implementations should try to do is they should try to potentially specialize more and specialize more in different things. So, like, for example, one of them could specialize more in light clients. The other could specialize more in, like, developer tools or validator tools, and potentially they could even, like, share some components, right? So basically, instead of having 10 things that are copying the same thing, like, you'd still need some amount of copying for redundancy, but a bit less than you have now, but instead you have more kind of branching out into different areas and into different philosophies. Also kind of going like light client first as one branch that would be good to see. Mobile first, which is pretty similar. A light client for ETH2 inside of ETH1 and, like, inside of other blockchains. A light client for ETH2 inside of a Snark circuit. Like, there's definitely different things that you can do, and I think trying to be more kind of creative and imaginative in that way is something that would be interesting to see more of the 2.0 teams doing.
No, it's awesome. So one of the questions I kind of got before when I was coming up with the list of questions here was sort of, it feels like a lot of the contributors are from the US or North America or Europe. How can somebody who's not one of these regions, like, how can they get involved in kind of this ecosystem, the development, and kind of just in general, like, with these projects? Like, do you have any thoughts on sort of what the ways are, and maybe kind of contrast that with the grants program by the Ethereum Foundation as well?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'd say, like, even, like, Asia as a region is starting to do better and better tech-wise. Like, I was just in Korea last week, and there was a team there that was just working on a pretty novel way to build a Plasma implementation, and they actually got pretty far. So that made me really happy. So I think it depends on what region. So some regions I think are handicapped by language. Like basically, they like the resources are mostly in English, and if you don't speak English, and even if you don't speak English as a first language, that just puts a huge barrier in front of you trying to participate in the ecosystem. So supporting translations is one thing that we as a community can do to help. Otherwise, also just education in general, but then if you have those things, then like if people have the kind of the knowledge and the skills and kind of know where to go, like I mean, a lot of the teams are pretty global, and they'll be happy to just have contributors from like Africa or India or just South America and anywhere, but that's, there's obviously a long way between kind of the status quo today and everyone who potentially could be contributing, like actually having that knowledge. So trying to close those gaps is definitely something that's important.
Absolutely. Sort of tangential to what we've talked about, I wanted to ask sort of a question that I think that's kind of been popping up a lot recently. To a lot of the people in the world, certain messaging apps are the internet, by all means. And when you have sort of a scenario where anywhere from different apps having hundreds of millions to billions of users, to the audience there, that's kind of what they know and kind of see as how do you get access to information. If any of them kind of offer anywhere from decentralized type solutions to kind of issuing their own money or currencies, and kind of just promote financial applications leveraged by blockchain. Do you think that's a good thing? Is that a net positive? Does that kind of negate any of the existing kind of beliefs that either you or the community holds? And kind of how do you perceive that?
And that's definitely one of those kind of double-edged swords. Like it's like a big part of, I guess it depends on like the application. It depends on whether like what you see the benefit of like blockchains and decentralization as being. But at least to me, it's like a big part is definitely just kind of empowering people, not just as consumers, but also as producers. And that's something that I think like blockchains even just do really well, because it's not just that anyone can use an app, it's a dApp, it's also that anyone can just go ahead and build one. And that's something that I think is like really valuable, and we should try to preserve more.
No, that's fair. So we're actually just going to move into the Q&A part here, and there's a lot of questions that I've received so far, so I'll try to ask as many as possible. And I'm going to start off by the first one, which is, will the blockchain data stay in gigabytes, or what are the plans for it to be smaller in the future?
The blockchain data. So the history can only grow, right? But what we are the client developers are thinking of doing is kind of pruning history. So either like not storing history that's older than say 1 year, or just moving it to some different data structure, like could be IPFS or some kind of sharded data store of some kind. So that would knock things down. The size of the state, so the amount of information you need to have on hand to just validate the next block, that's something that there are proposals to try to decrease. So there's the rent proposal, there's the stateless client proposal. So those are things that are kind of starting to happen. So there's definitely plans to try to reduce the kind of storage requirements of an Ethereum node in multiple ways.
No, for sure. I guess one other question we have from the audience is, what are sort of the biggest ways E2.0 will change how people build their dApps?
I think just as a developer, being kind of relying, the environment is going to become more asynchronous. So because like especially if you have a dApp that scales to more than one shard, like you're not going to be able to communicate between different shards exactly the same way as you can communicate inside of like one shard or inside of ETH 1.0 today. So coming up with kind of programming patterns that deal with that reality, I think is going to be one of the challenges. Also, I expect data to be cheaper relative to execution. So approaches that are more kind of, and relative to state. So expect approaches that are more kind of data heavy and less execution heavy and state heavy on chain are going to start making more sense. Those are we're hoping that block times are going to get faster and that they're going to get more regular and that kind of short-range forks are going to become more rare. And so the experience will be a bit closer to what you can expect to get out of a centralized system.
Okay, well, from a question from a tweet that you did earlier today, what would the world have looked like if you had gotten the internship at Ripple?
I don't know. Like,
we can skip it.
Yeah.
Okay. What is your favorite meme?
My favorite meme.
Specifically, the one you would choose to represent yourself.
Oh, that's not my favorite meme. I don't know. I don't really have a list of like favorite memes.
What are some of your favorite memes?
Am I supposed to have like a list of memes on hands that I like? Like, how do I answer this?
I don't keep up with the millennial culture anymore. I don't know.
Yeah,
we'll come back to this one.
Yeah, we'll come back to it. Okay.
On another less serious note, who do you think is Ethereum's biggest competitor?
It depends. I mean, well, ultimately, existing centralized systems and new centralized systems that try to kind of take just enough elements of blockchaining to look cool, but actually just are the same old stuff that we've had for decades.
I guess when you say that, does that mean you kind of envision this as a general purpose, one solution for everything type platform, or is it more of the fundamental technology itself lets you do this thing, but different solutions?
Ethereum is definitely not kind of by itself not optimal for every use case. I mean, there are plenty of cases where you just want to build centralized things. There's plenty of cases where you need decentralization, but you don't need a blockchain. There's cases where like you just want some really high performance specialized thing. Sometimes you might want some layer 2 thing that's on it that's connects into Ethereum. So there's definitely different trade-offs, and for different applications it makes sense to do things in different ways.
No, that makes sense. In terms of, so there's a question that says, is there a possibility that nation states could censor or block Ethereum or dApps? And if so, how would they do that?
Could nation states censor, block Ethereum or dApps? There's definitely things that they can do easily that they're not doing already. The simplest one is just banning exchanges. Like, if you just make it like 5 times harder for people to get cryptocurrency, then that just makes it significantly harder for any application that depends on it, like even the non-financial ones, to get very, very large-scale adoption. I mean, will the space be able to kind of survive if the whole, if most of the world does that? Even that's an unproven hypothesis. I mean, if they want to do more, then there's definitely different kind of ways that they could attack it, but then there's ways that that platforms could harden themselves, and then it starts becoming pretty complicated.
Do you kind of envision that as a cat and mouse game, or is it more of?
And there's definitely cats and there's definitely mice. So yeah.
Fair enough. One, that's factually correct.
Did you know there's also pigeons?
One other question we have from the audience, and we'll kind of get maybe 1 or 2 more in, and then we'll wrap this up.
So when I visited Korea a couple of weeks ago, I saw a meerkat. Okay, go ahead. What's the question?
Do you think sidechains will be redundant in the future? And kind of maybe for context, kind of just go over what they are.
So I guess if by sidechain you mean this kind of older idea that you have chains that just have some kind of connection to some other chain and that don't really have, where the security model basically is that you do have to trust the sidechain. Yeah, I mean, I honestly think like there's not much need for those. Like the only kind of sidechain that really makes sense is the non-custodial ones like Plasma, I would say. Well, and Plasma just basically is the word for the category of non-custodial sidechains. So I'm definitely kind of bullish on those things. Otherwise, like things that require trusting kind of specific groups of nodes where like it's difficult for users from far away to determine whether or not they should be trustworthy, like why do that?
Sure, I got two more and then we'll wrap this up. So one question from the audience is, what are some of the risks for this ecosystem or things that keep you up at night?
Definitely just the biggest risk is us not being able to build things kind of fast enough. And like the usual thing that people say is, like, oh, if we don't build this things fast enough, then some other blockchain competitor will take over. But the other risk, as I mentioned, that potentially is even larger, is that if the space takes too long, then like existing centralized systems will just continue improving themselves, and we'll have lost a big opportunity to just make decentralized applications and data layers like actually be the foundation for like a generation of applications getting built on them.
No, that's great. And kind of just to finally end, what does decentralization mean to you, and why is it important?
Yeah, and decentralization it means lots of different things to different people, and it also just depends on what application you're building. I would say some of the biggest benefits are like, a big one is just trust, right? So like if you're building something and you intend it to be like infrastructure or like a platform that other people build on top of, that's something that really just should be decentralized, because that's like the only way you have to just really make like clearly show to your users that you're not going to kind of sweep the rug up from under their noses, or whatever the expression is, when they've already built the platform and they're locked in. Like even just the fact that we use the word platform to refer to just centralized things maintained by one guy is kind of sad, honestly. Like I think if we're building things that entire economies end up relying on, it should just be something that's kind of common infrastructure that once it's built, there's not like one party that can either get hacked, causing causing the whole thing to stop working, or kind of become a monopoly and start trying to extract rent from all of that, or get captured from some political interest that represents only a small subset of the users of the system. So I think having some kind of properly decentralized base layers for many things is something that makes sense. I'm also just generally interested in this idea of just building new kinds of mechanisms and new kinds of ways to kind of motivate people to collaborate with each other. And like that could mean economic incentives. It could mean things like DAOs. It could also mean social incentives, possibly some combination of both. And there, the goal, like one of the big goals is just like more decentralized approaches just are how you get better information efficiency. Like as I mentioned, right, most of the information about how trustworthy people are, for example, like who's like what things are valuable to whom, how valuable are different things. Like that doesn't exist in central servers. That exists kind of split up between all 8 billion of us. And so that's like these more decentralized approaches that allow people to kind of participate in all parts of the and all sides of the ecosystem, I think, are something that are really valuable in that sense.
With that, Vitalik, thank you so much for being here.
No, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh.